Well, hi there. My name is Robert Martin. I'm the director of the City Bible Forum here in Melbourne, and I helped organise our dialogue on Friday night, Life, the Universe and Nothing, between Professor Lawrence Krauss and Dr. William Lane Craig. It was held in the Melbourne Town Hall before 1,700 people. It was a fantastic night, and I'm here with Mr. Oz Atheist himself, Donovan, to have a bit of a chat about the dialogue and the evening, and just to continue the conversation in some way. Welcome, Donovan. Thanks for coming into the salubrious surrounds of the City Bible Forum office. Some may think it's a bit of a prison cell, but it's actually not too bad. So you went along on Friday night.
Yes.
Your thoughts?
I really liked it. I liked the format. I wasn't sure whether it was going to be a structured debate or not. Each speaker had their 15 minutes at the start, and then they sat down together, and it was more a conversation than a debate, which I really liked. I think that worked well. I've seen enough debates now to sort of know how they flow. And what I liked was when one of them was making a point. In a structured debate, you can speak for your 5 or 10 minutes, and you can do that without being interrupted. And if you say something that the other person knows to be wrong, it still gets out to the audience, and they've heard it as though it's true. Whereas in this format, I like that they were able to stop each other and say, hang on, that's wrong, and here's why. And the audience were able to hear that on the spot. So I think that format worked really well. I thought the moderation was good.
There's a number of different views about the moderation. Some people felt that he was not proactive enough, and other people were happy that he just sort of let things go.
I thought there was probably a couple of times when he could have stopped them a little bit sooner and said, okay, I think we've exhausted this, let's move on. Because obviously both gentlemen are passionate about their side of the argument, and I'm sure left up to their own devices, they would speak for hours. So,
well, yes, that's certainly the case. Yeah. It has been known to be done, I think, at different times.
So I think maybe there was once or twice when he could have said, okay, I think we're done here, let's move on, and probably had time for more questions from the audience, things like that. But overall, I thought it worked really well.
No, I think I agree, and I think the thing that I found interesting was that we had 3 sustained conversations, didn't we? I mean, we'll talk about that in a second as we go through. We review the content of the dialogue. And there was a sustained conversation on origins and fine-tuning and so on. There was a sustained conversation on historical Jesus resurrection, and there was a sustained conversation on morality. And I think as a person observing the discussion, and whilst it would have been good to have more questions from the audience, I still felt that the interaction on those 3 topics alone was really worthwhile.
Yeah, it definitely, and it really made the night, I thought. It was like being in their lounge room almost, and just part of a conversation, and we just happened to be watching it, and I thought that worked really well.
It was a very, very large lounge room, though, I suppose. Yeah, that's right.
A lounge room for 1,700
people. That's right. So I'm glad I don't have to provide drinks for all those people. That's right. Yeah. So I mean, the other thing, I found out that there was a big AFL football game on that night, Collingwood with Hawthorn, and I mean, you skipped the first half of the football.
I did. When you told me about the event, I looked it up, and the first thing I do whenever someone invites me to something on a weekend, Friday night or weekend in winter, is look to see when Collingwood's playing. That is serious, I'm not joking. And I saw that it was the Collingwood-Hawthorn match, which, is a big match. Hawthorn have great support, Collingwood obviously have massive support. And I thought, this is a once-off. Like, I'm not going to get to see William Lane Craig and Lawrence Krauss have this discussion again. Whereas, even though that particular match is a once-off, I'll see Collingwood tonight. I'll see them play Hawthorn again next year if we don't meet in the finals. So I weighed that up, and I thought, I'll go along to the debate, or the discussion, and then not long before it, I saw that it was scheduled for 7 to 9 p.m. So I thought, I can get to the footy at half time.
But was it worthwhile going to the footy though?
No, it wasn't. Had I known the result beforehand, I might have just stuck with my friends who went out after the discussion.
Got a couple of autographs or something.
Yes, exactly.
Well, let's talk about the dialogue itself. Now, I felt that it was a very enjoyable, quite an enjoyable night, very interesting exchange of ideas. And Now, I suppose I've been talking to various different people who are Christians or atheists beforehand, and a lot of them have suggested that their side won. You know, Krauss won, hands down, or Craig demolished Krauss and so on.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Personally, I think Krauss won, and I think anyone who went along was familiar with either side of the argument. They would know William or Lawrence from watching them on YouTube, reading their books, or however they came about it. And I think they would go into that discussion agreeing with that person already. Some people like myself, and I'm pretty sure quite a few of the people I went with would be familiar with the other side as well. For someone like me who is a vocal atheist, vocal about what I feel, it's important to be familiar with the other side. If you're arguing one side of a point and you've never looked at the other side, you're not going to be able to do that very well. So I'm quite familiar with William and his arguments for God. I've watched him in a lot of debates on YouTube and things like that. So even though I was quite familiar with both sides, I wanted to see them talk it out in person. But there wasn't anything for me that was particularly new. It was nice to hear it in person, and Lawrence would say something, I'd go to myself, yeah, spot on, you've got that right, and then William would say something, I'd say, I can't agree with you there, and this is why, like, inside my head. And I think a lot of people would be the same, that they would have their idea before they head in, and it's very unlikely that watching it in person, the other side will change their mind. But that doesn't mean it's not worth it.
No. Well, I suppose I'd even add to that and suggest that there were people who were certainly maybe committed or had a sort of a leaning towards one side. But I think the nature of the dialogue did mean that ideas were exchanged and existing ideas and so on were challenged. And there are some people who walked away thinking things differently afterwards. I know some of my people I've talked to did say that, certainly, someone's, particularly William Lane Craig, has challenged me to think about these things, and I'm going to go away and continue to read and explore further.
And sometimes that's all it takes to change your mind on a subject. It's not, here is the absolute proof why you're wrong. It's, here's an idea, and then you take that idea yourself and you go and explore that idea through different means. So, yeah, I think that would have happened. I'm sure Lawrence has said something that a believer has thought, well, hang on, maybe I should look into that. And William might have said something, well, how about this? And someone's thought, I need to read up on that a bit more.
Yeah. So the format of the night, each speaker had 15 minutes to present their case, so particularly for those who may not have been familiar with the other person's work, so it was an opportunity to at least hear them speak and to hear their argument or their position. And then we had a period of moderated discussion, and then we opened up for questions from the audience. Now, the moderated discussion focused on three sort of areas. There was the opening comments on origin of the universe and cosmology and so on. Now, I was intrigued at this point. I thought that there was a very interesting conversation. I thought Lawrence Krauss made a very interesting admission at one point, where he said that he thought that it was likely that the universe did have a beginning. Now, I think Dr. Craig asked him, and then Krauss suggested, well, that the beginning can't be God, and then Craig asked the question, well, why not? And I suppose, in my view, at least you'd have to be open to the possibility that if the universe did have a beginning, that surely God would be one of the options that you'd have to open up for that particular piece of evidence. What would you?
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and it depends, obviously, what you call God. It doesn't necessarily mean God of the Bible at all. It doesn't mean a God that's interventionist and is actually concerned with what's going on Earth. It doesn't mean a God that cares about what people wear on their head, or how many times a day they pray or anything like that. I've often said that the deism argument, I can't argue against that. If you say a God or a being, whatever, created the universe and then left it alone, you can't. I don't see how you could prove that wrong, and I don't see how that's any different to atheism anyway. A God that's absent is just as meaningful as a God that doesn't exist.
I've had an interesting discussion about that recently as well. But I suppose there's an interesting point there, though, because the topic of the night was: is it reasonable to believe there is a God?
Yes.
There'd be a different question to say: is it reasonable to believe there is an interventionist?
Yes.
God? I suppose that would be a very different conversation. And I suppose that Craig is at least demonstrating that, it seems reasonable to at least believe that there could be this theistic, or this God of deism.
Probably
perhaps.
you could say it's reasonable to keep the possibility that maybe a God had something to do with the beginning.
That's a very
Is that
qualified
enough?
statement. That's a very qualified statement. Yes, that's right. But I suppose the other thing that I don't think that Craig was actually arguing that from the origin of the universe that the God of the Bible, he's necessarily arguing for the God of the Bible. He's arguing, I think, for a theistic, theism in its general sense, sort of, which is I think as far as you can get, which is what he's used, which is natural theology. He's not using any revealed theology or any sort of sense of revelation or God speaking to me. He's just sort of saying from philosophy and cosmology, it seems reasonable that there could be. Yes. It's likely that there is this being out there.
And that's what I think. I think likely is a stretch. It seems to me that his argument boils down to, I can't think of a natural way a universe began, therefore it must have been God. We used to not be able to think of a natural way that lightning occurred, and we called it God. We know now that it's not. So I think to make that leap, that's the problem that I have, and I'm sure that a lot of my atheist friends have, is why, just because we don't know how it started, do we then assume that it's God? We need to look into it more. We need to actually find the answer rather than just assume that the answer is a God.
Well, that's probably a topic for another conversation one day. But it's interesting. I think that that's a helpful point, and I think because this is the way that these arguments can be framed from theists and so on, is that it does tend to sound like a God of the gaps kind of argument.
Yes.
Because I can't explain it, therefore God. Although I think I suppose that there'd be a slight. I'd make an exception for the beginning of the universe, because I think the question perhaps could be framed about, well, why is there anything at all?
Yes.
And I think that and it becomes difficult to see. Like in my mind, perhaps Lawrence Krauss again could perhaps explain this a bit more clearly to me. That it seems difficult to see how the universe can be self-creating, or it just begs the question: well, where did that come from? And I think, in my mind, I think you've only got two options: either you've got a self-creating eternal universe, or you have an eternal God who creates. For me, I side with the second. That it seems reasonable to believe, and that's driven to me partly from natural theology, but also partly from other aspects of theology, which perhaps maybe leads us on to the next conversation, which was the discussion on the historical Jesus, resurrection. Very interesting discussion, and I thought particularly interesting because Lawrence Krauss had previously said that he made some offhand comments that he didn't think that Jesus existed. Then on Friday, I thought to his credit, he said there was good historical evidence to suggest that there was an historical character, Jesus. Yeah. You obviously heard that same comment.
Yes, I did.
What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree that it was interesting that obviously something over time has changed his mind there. I don't know what he's been reading or what has convinced him. So it shows that at least that he's willing to read the information. If there is evidence that he feels supports the case for Jesus, then he's willing to admit that, which is good. But obviously it's not a concession that biblical Jesus existed, just a historical one. And I find, whether or not he did is not the point. Can we show that he did the things that are claimed? That's when they're really interesting.
And they had that conversation as well, I think, didn't they? And I think, I suppose in my mind that to acknowledging that at least he existed is one step along the way to suggesting that the resurrection happened. It seems difficult to have a resurrection of Jesus if he didn't really exist. But and I suppose there was interesting discussion again on the resurrection, and there was a conversation on miracles.
Yes.
And can miracles occur, etc. And is it reasonable to believe that the resurrection of Jesus occurred, and so on? What did you make of that whole conversation there?
I think William makes a good case for it, but it's trusting information that can't be verified. It is hearsay. It's word of mouth, and I know that oral tradition can keep large elements of the truth. I think William claimed that it was 5 years after the resurrection that it first started to be written down. I don't know if that's accurate, but 5 years is still a long time. I couldn't write accurately about what happened last Tuesday.
Maybe it says something more about your memory, perhaps.
but try to think of it. I know it was a major event, and obviously it's going to stay in people's minds more than just what you had for breakfast the other day. But, try to think of something major 5 years ago and wonder how much you could write down about it accurately, how believable you can make it, how much you can trust your memory. And I can't believe it. I can't believe that 5 years later someone wrote down accurately something that happened and know for sure that that's what occurred.
Well, that's another, again, a conversation another time perhaps. As we're just doing a review here, but I disagree. Obviously, I disagree.
Yes.
I'd say that. I think 2008 is 5 years ago now, and that was who became president that year. I think we can remember kind of fairly key events, and I think that something is of such magnitude as someone being raised from the dead. I'd suggest that there's a good likelihood that you're likely to remember that. I suppose.
But I think what it shows is that people think they saw him.
Yeah.
You could probably make a decent case that yes, people definitely think they saw Jesus. Or someone reported that people think that they saw Jesus after he was supposedly crucified. It's not a case for yes, they did.
Yeah.
It's for a case for yes, they think they did.
Yeah, and that was covered in the conversation, wasn't it? Between
and that's where the two sides differ.
Yeah.
I think Lawrence is saying, okay, maybe he existed, maybe someone thinks they saw him, but that doesn't mean that they did. And William is saying, but almost, why would they write it down if they didn't?
Yeah, but the other thing that William mentioned, which I don't think they discussed in as much detail, was that there's still the empty tomb that needs to be accounted for. The earliest alternative account of the resurrection also assumed an empty tomb as well. So the Pharisees suggested that the disciples stole the body.
Yes.
So I think, and William adds a third argument there as well, suggesting that the very origin of the belief of the resurrection is idiosyncratic. It's not what you would expect. And so he's suggesting that it's inference to the best explanation. Those three facts, the appearances, empty tomb, and the origin of the belief, contribute to the fact, or the best explanation of that is Jesus' resurrection. Your thoughts? Yeah.
I think that's a staggering leap to suggest that that's the best explanation. I can't remember how much Lawrence actually said on the night.
The nature of miracles itself.
Yeah.
He spoke a bit about it. Obviously, hopefully the video footage will come out soon and everyone can look for themselves.
So I don't necessarily just want to argue against what William was saying, since we're just reviewing the actual thing. But I just think it's a leap. I think for every explanation we have for anything, without exception, is a natural explanation. To suddenly say a resurrection by a God is the best explanation, I can't buy it.
Sure. Okay. Well, another leap. Let's move on to the third conversation they had, and again, it was some interesting discussion on morality. And I thought it was a very interesting discussion about objective moral values and so on. Are they there? And then again, interesting comments that Professor Krauss made about incest.
Yes.
He suggested that incest, he couldn't actually see anything wrong with it if they use protection and they kind of go their separate ways. Can't see a problem with that. Personally, I think that's an interesting concession because it is, in some respects, consistent with an atheist kind of view of morality.
Yes.
What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's something that I've thought about as a topic. What is the problem with it? Okay, I wouldn't want to do it. I don't know anyone that would want to do it. So where do the issues lie? Do we say, well, the family unit becomes at risk if we allow incest or remove the taboo from it and legalise it if you like? And do we say we need to protect the family unit more than we need to allow brothers and sisters that kind of relationship? So it is an interesting point in that we say that it's wrong, but why do we say that it's wrong? I've never heard someone give a reasonable reason, if that makes sense, as to why it's wrong. I think parent-child is, I think you could argue why that's wrong, because it's not a level relationship. There is obviously the parent has a different relationship with the child than a siblings would. So I know we all think it's wrong. I don't know anyone that thinks that incest between siblings is a good idea, but I've never been told why it's wrong.
Well, and I suppose that's
I think that's what Lawrence is saying.
Yeah.
He's not saying he advocates it. I think he's saying that if we're saying it's wrong, we need to find out why.
Yeah, and I suppose in an atheistic framework, there's no rational reason to suggest that it is wrong.
And then, we get all the flags raising up, going, "Oh, atheists are for incest," and go, "Hang on, that's not what we're saying."
But I suppose, but it's the natural result
Yes.
of an atheistic morality,
which is, the atheist morality, if such a thing exists, is definitely leaning towards allowing rather than preventing.
Yes, that's right. And I suppose that's where, perhaps not necessarily a theistic, but perhaps a Christian or Jewish view would suggest that there is prohibitions for this type of behaviour, and that's actually wrong. But I suppose so that was an interesting discussion, but I suppose the other discussion was around the nature of the presence of objective moral values, which is one of Craig's arguments at different times, that if there are objective moral values, then there has to be a God. I don't know, what would you make of that discussion on morality and so on?
Morality has been a tough one for me. Like I swing either way.
Being moral, or the
well, some would say so.
Okay, this is not a confession video. That's right. Yeah.
So I think it's a good argument to say, from William, to say that if something is always wrong, why is it always wrong?
I agree.
And do we get that instruction from a God? It's an interesting question. But there's reasons why something might be always wrong. Like we think murder is always wrong, but we can argue why it is always wrong. It's not good for anything. I think even the person that does it, it's not good for them either. Mm-hmm. So I think we can argue why things are always wrong, and it doesn't need to be a God that's behind that. And I think that's what the counter to William's argument is.
Yeah, well, that would be another fruitful discussion in itself. So, your overall impressions of the night? Like, you walked away.
I walked away
satisfied. You missed the first half of Collingwood Essendon Gate.
Collingwood
Hawthorn.
Yes. Overall, I thought it was great. I really enjoyed it. I've listened to so much of each of these guys online so many times. It was good to see them in person doing their thing. I was a little surprised that William, he wasn't as comfortable as what I expected. I completely disagree with almost everything he says, but he presents it really well. He is a good debater. I mean, he's basically a professional debater, so he knows what he's doing when he's up on stage arguing his case. On the night, I thought he was a little shaky, probably not quite so comfortable in that format.
Well, it's probably the format more than anything. He's used to the formal kind of debate style. But I mean, I actually thought that, I agree. I don't think he looked as comfortable, but I still thought that he held himself very well. And I thought he made his points very clearly and made some very, very useful contributions. And I thought that there was some interchange. But I think that's right, and I think that he did. It wasn't as comfortable as otherwise would be the case.
But they were both good, and it was good of them to both come out and actually do it. And obviously, people wanted to see it. Like, the town hall was full. Right? It was 1,700 people there, if you say. And Melbourne in particular, but Australia in general, we don't feel particularly there's a theism versus atheism here. Like, I talk to a lot of friends from the US on Twitter, and it's so different over there, and they're constantly fighting, just for a voice and to be heard and to sort of hold the tide of religion back from their communities, and they can feel, that they're alone, that they won't speak up. Whereas, if I went to someone in Melbourne and said, "Oh yeah, I'm an atheist," I'd expect them to go, "Okay,
sure,
whatever."
That's right,
Which is, I guess, then becomes unusual as to why I'm so vocal about it and have such a presence on Twitter with it all. So to see that many people roll up in Melbourne and want to view this discussion, it was kind of encouraging. It was good.
I agree. I think it was a great event, great night, lots of people, and a great opportunity to explore big questions of life. That was the whole purpose, and as part of our conversation today was to continue the conversation. Obviously, it's led to lots of interesting things. So I hope you've enjoyed our little discussion here, Donovan, Mr. Oz Atheist. Thanks very much for a very interesting conversation, and hopefully we'll look forward to seeing you at another event sometime soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.